Honor thy father and thy mother. It's one of the oldest commandments in human history, so deeply ingrained that for centuries the family was treated like a sacred fortress, private, untouchable, above criticism. What happened in the house stayed in the house. No questions, no witnesses, no public trials. But if you scroll TikTok, YouTube, or Reddit today, you'll see something that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. That fortress is crumbling. Millions of views are piling up on stories about toxic families, narcissistic abuse, and going no contact. Adult children aren't just moving out anymore. They're moving out and then stepping into the public square of the internet to expose the parents who raised them. They're sharing screenshots of manipulative texts, posting recordings of explosive arguments, describing years of control, humiliation, emotional neglect, details that used to stay buried for decades. To an outsider, it might look like drama, like revenge, like a generation obsessed with victimhood and attention. But if you look closer, through the lens of psychology, you'll see something far more unsettling and far more human. This isn't just airing dirty laundry. For many survivors, it's a desperate, often final attempt to reclaim reality. Because in toxic families, the abuse doesn't just hurt you, it rewrites your mind. It teaches you to doubt your own memory, to distrust your own emotions, to question whether you're even allowed to call what happened abuse. So why do adult children break the ultimate taboo? Why expose their parents to an audience of strangers? Is it malice or is it survival? Welcome to the psychology of breaking the silence. To understand why someone would publicly expose their parents, you first have to understand the world they're escaping from. In a healthy family, conflict exists, but it gets repaired. People apologize, boundaries are respected, love isn't perfect, but it's real. When something breaks, the family tries to put it back together. In a toxic family system, conflict is never repaired. It is buried, and buried conflict doesn't disappear. It mutates. It becomes silent rules, unspoken roles, and emotional landmines that everyone learns to tiptoe around, especially the child. Because in many toxic homes, particularly those led by narcissistic or emotionally immature parents, there is one rule above all others: appearances matter more than reality. Psychologists sometimes describe this as image maintenance. The family doesn't function like a place of safety. It functions like a brand, a performance, a carefully curated public identity that must be protected at all costs. So the parent becomes obsessed with how they are perceived. To the outside world, they might be the devoted churchgoer, the generous neighbor, the hard-working single mother, the father who sacrificed everything. They smile at school events, they speak politely to strangers, they get praise for being such great parents. And then the front door closes. Inside the home, that same parent may become controlling, humiliating, emotionally cold, or explosively angry. Love becomes conditional. Approval becomes currency. And the child learns that their job isn't to be safe. Their job is to protect the image. That's the part most people miss. The trauma isn't only what happened. It's what you were forced to pretend didn't happen. If the child speaks up, they're punished. Not just with anger, but with denial. That never happened. You're too sensitive. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me. Over time, the child's reality becomes a threat to the family's reputation. And when your reality is treated like a betrayal, you begin to question your own mind. This is how a child becomes a secret keeper. Not because they're loyal, but because they're trained. When you grow up in a toxic family, the abuse doesn't just happen to you, it happens inside your mind. Because the child is forced to live in two worlds at once. In public, your parent is charming, warm, respectable. They smile for photos, tell funny stories, give advice to neighbours, and receive compliments like medals. People say things like, "You're so lucky to have a mum like that," or "Your dad is such a good man." But at home, the mask comes off. That same parent might mock you, shame you, control you, explode over small mistakes, or punish you with silence that feels like emotional starvation. And here's where the psychological damage becomes extreme. Your brain cannot reconcile those two realities. This is what psychology calls cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting truths at the same time. My parent loves me. My parent hurts me. My parent is respected. My parent is cruel. For a child, that tension is unbearable, so the mind tries to solve it. And the easiest solution is not, "My parent is abusive." The easiest solution is, "It must be me." That's why gaslighting works so well in families, not because the child is weak, but because the child is wired for attachment. Children will sacrifice truth before they sacrifice the bond. So when the child finally says, "That hurt me," they're met with denial. "You're exaggerating. That's not what happened. I never said that. You're too sensitive. You always make me the villain." Over and over, the child is taught a horrifying lesson. Your feelings are not evidence. Your memory is not trustworthy. Your perception is defective. And eventually, something snaps. They stop trusting themselves. They begin collecting proof, screenshots, recordings, journal entries, not because they want drama, but because their nervous system is desperate for a solid ground to stand on. This is what reality erosion looks like. It's not just confusion, it's a psychological prison where you're constantly wondering, did it really happen like I remember? Am I being unfair? Am I the toxic one? And that internal doubt becomes the perfect tool for control. Because when you don't trust your own reality, you become easy to rewrite. This is the question people love to ask, usually with judgment disguised as logic. If it was really that bad, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you speak up sooner? But that question only makes sense if you assume toxic families operate like normal relationships. They don't. In a toxic family system, silence isn't a choice, it's conditioning. Because the child learns early, telling the truth doesn't bring help. It brings consequences. If they cry, they're mocked. If they complain, they're punished. If they ask for comfort, they're called dramatic. If they confront the parent becomes the victim. And slowly, the child develops something psychology understands very well: shame-based identity. Not just, "I did something wrong," but "I am wrong." They begin to believe that their needs are a burden. Their emotions are selfish. Their anger is proof they're ungrateful. And once shame becomes your identity, you don't expose your parents, you protect them. Because if the parent is bad, then what does that make you? Then there's the second trap: trauma bonding. Toxic parents often don't abuse non-stop. They alternate, they explode, then they soften, they insult, then they buy gifts, they rage, then they act loving, as if nothing happened. That unpredictability creates addiction. The child clings to the rare moments of warmth, like proof that love exists. They spend years chasing the version of their parent they saw for 10 minutes after the storm. And finally, maybe the most devastating piece, learned helplessness. When a child tries again and again to speak up, set boundaries, or ask for fairness, and every attempt fails, the brain adapts. It stops trying, not because they're weak, but because their nervous system learns a brutal equation: speaking up is dangerous, silence is survival. So they stay quiet for years, decades. They minimize, they rationalize, they try to be good enough to earn love that should have been free. Until one day, silence costs more than truth, and that's when everything changes. So what changes? How does someone carry a family secret for 20 or 30 years and then suddenly post about it on a random Tuesday? It's rarely impulsive, and it's almost never petty. In psychology, we look for what's called a catalyst event, the moment the pain of staying silent finally outweighs the fear of speaking out. It's not one big thought, it's a breaking point, a crack in the dam that's been holding back the truth for years. For many survivors, that catalyst happens the day they become a parent. They hold their newborn child, this tiny innocent human, and something shifts inside them. They don't just remember the past, they feel it differently. And the realization hits like a freight train. I could never do to you what was done to me. Suddenly all the excuses collapse. They did their best. It was tough love. They didn't mean it. No, you see it clearly. Another common catalyst is freedom. Marriage, moving out, financial independence. Toxic systems depend on control. And when control slips, the parent escalates. They send hundreds of texts. They threaten. They rage. They demand loyalty. They create chaos to pull you back in. That escalation is often called an extinction burst, the abuser getting louder when their old tactics stop working. And sometimes the catalyst is therapy, or a single sentence in a book, or a video that finally gives the experience a name. Gaslighting, enmeshment, narcissistic abuse. When language arrives, the fog lifts, and then the body joins the conversation. Your heart racing when the phone rings, your hands shaking as you open a message, your stomach dropping from a simple, "we need to talk," because your mind can deny it for years. But your nervous system remembers. And when that dam breaks, the truth doesn't leak out quietly, it floods. This is where the story becomes controversial, because once the dam breaks, a reasonable question follows. Why tell the internet? Why not just talk to a therapist or a close friend? And the answer is uncomfortable, but deeply psychological. In many toxic families, abuse happens in the dark. There are no witnesses, or worse, there are witnesses who refuse to see it. Siblings minimize it. Relatives excuse it. One parent enables the other. Everyone learns to keep the peace. And when the victim finally speaks up, the system responds like an immune reaction. Don't embarrass the family. Your parents did their best. You're tearing everyone apart. Psychology calls this betrayal trauma. When the people who are supposed to protect you become part of the harm. You're not just hurt by the parent, you're erased by the entire system. So the adult child goes online for one thing they never got at home. A witness, not someone to fix it, not someone to punish the parent, just someone to look at the story and say, "I believe you. That was not normal. You're not crazy." That single sentence can undo years of gaslighting, because gaslighting isn't just manipulation, it's isolation. It's making you feel like you're the only person on earth who sees the truth. And the internet, when used wisely, becomes a universal witness, a digital tribe, thousands of people who recognize the same patterns, who say, "My mother did that too," or "That exact sentence was used on me." For the survivor, it's not clout, it's oxygen. It's proof that their reality exists outside the walls of the family fortress. To outsiders, toxic family drama can look emotional, messy, impulsive, personal. But inside the system, it's not just emotional, it's political. Because narcissistic family systems don't run on love. They run on power, and power comes from one thing above all: control of the narrative. This is why exposure is so terrifying to them. In these families, the parent isn't simply trying to be right, they're trying to stay untouchable. The public image of the good parent isn't a personality trait, it's armor. And the child's silence is what keeps that armor intact. That's also why these systems usually assign roles. There's often a golden child, the one who represents the family's perfection. And there's a scapegoat, the one who carries the blame for everything that feels wrong. The scapegoat isn't hated because they're bad. They're targeted because they're honest, because they react, because they refuse, at least internally, to fully accept the lie. And then there are the enablers, the relatives who say, "That's just how your mum is," or "Don't upset your father." They're not always evil. Sometimes they're terrified. Sometimes they benefit from the system. But either way, they help keep the narrative stable. So when the scapegoat exposes the truth publicly, it's not just embarrassing, it's destabilizing. It's like pulling the master key out of the lock. Because once the narrative breaks, control breaks. And that's why toxic parents don't respond to exposure with reflection. They respond with war, denial, rage, threats, smear campaigns, anything to reclaim the story. In their mind, the child didn't just share their experience, they committed the ultimate crime. They took away the family's power to pretend. Now we have to ask the hardest question, the one everyone argues about in comment sections. Isn't this just revenge? To the toxic parent, it absolutely feels like an attack. To relatives, it can look like betrayal. And yes, sometimes there is anger. Sometimes there is vindication. But psychologically, revenge and recovery are not the same thing, even if they look identical from the outside. Revenge is about causing pain. Recovery is about ending control. Because for many adult children, keeping things private didn't protect them. It protected the abuser. The silence wasn't mature, it was a cage. And after years of being guilt-tripped, gaslit, and pulled back in every time they tried to leave, some survivors realized something chilling. A quiet boundary can still be violated. A private exit can still be chased. A closed door can still be kicked down. So they choose what psychologists might call a scorched earth boundary. They expose everything publicly, not because they want applause, but because they need something irreversible. They need a line the toxic parent can't manipulate them into crossing again. In other words, the exposure becomes a form of protection. It's a way of saying, I'm done negotiating my reality. I'm done defending myself in private. I'm done being pulled back in by guilt. And here's the paradox. They destroy the relationship to save themselves. Because once the world has seen the truth, the survivor can no longer be the good child. They can't go back to performing. They can't pretend. The mask is off. The bridge is burned. And in that destruction, many finally find freedom. But freedom has a price. When you expose a toxic family system, the system doesn't collapse quietly. It fights back. And it often fights back in the ugliest way possible. A smear campaign. The parent reframes the story instantly. Not as my child is hurting but he out, but as my child is attacking. They call relatives. They rewrite history. They cry to the community. They turn themselves into the victim and you into the villain. Then come the flying monkeys, family members sent to do the dirty work. Look what you're doing to your mother. You're killing your father with stress. How could you embarrass the family like this, after everything they sacrificed? And that's when the survivor realizes something devastating. They may lose more than a parent, they may lose the entire family, because some relatives don't want truth. They want stability. They'd rather keep the illusion than face what it cost you. And even if the internet supports you at first, there's often a crash afterward. The likes fade, the comments slow down, the adrenaline leaves your body, and then comes the loneliness, grieving the parents you have, and mourning the parents you never had. The internet can validate your reality, but it can't hold your hand at night. So here's the truth. Exposure is not healing. Exposure is an event. Healing is a process. Going public can shatter the silence, but it also creates real risks. That's why survivors need three things: ethics, safety, and a roadmap. First, safety. Protect your job, your identity, your location. Know the legal risks. If you're dealing with someone volatile, prioritize physical safety over being heard. Second, ethics. Ask yourself, what is my goal? Is this about reclaiming your narrative or escalating chaos? Healing begins when your truth becomes a boundary, not a battlefield. And third, a roadmap. Real recovery is reparenting yourself, learning nervous system regulation, building a chosen family, creating a life where your peace no longer depends on their approval. Because the goal isn't to destroy your parents, the goal is to free yourself. If this video put words to something you've lived through, you're not alone. Subscribe for more psychology-based videos like this. And if you feel safe, leave a comment. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Thank you for watching.